on Monday, we spoke to Professor Dion Forster from Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam on the topic of whether churches and religious organizations should be regulated or not in South Africa. You do, of course, have the constitutional right to belief and the association of a religious institution. But South Africa is, of course, a secular nation, but we are overwhelmingly religious, particularly when it comes to the Christian faith. Something like 85% of South Africans identify as being Christian. But while there are many mainstream churches, there are also, over the last while, been the proliferation of fringe religious groups, Pentecostal Christian groups, prosperity gospel groups that are seemingly pushing the boundaries. Now, the Cultural, Religious and Language Rights Commission, they're saying, well, let us look at maybe regulating or maybe instituting some sort of self-regulation within the religious sector. Professor Dion Forster was quite diplomatic in his assessment. We have to, of course, balance the rights of freedom of religion, freedom of association, the freedom of choice of members of those religious groups, with also protecting the most vulnerable. But I was contacted by Dr. Tristán Kapp, who is a religious studies scholar and is also a human rights advocate specializing in comparative religion, being a little bit more strident, a little bit more direct when he says, yes, religion should be regulated in South Africa. And he joins me now. Good morning, Dr. Tristán Kapp. As a scholar of theology, I would assume that you would think, well, it is about someone's personal choice of association, also the own autonomy, the own agency. Why are you so strident that, yes, religion should be regulated in this country?
Good morning, Lester. Thank you for having me. So, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this topic because it's a topic that I'm quite passionate about and something that I've been passionate about for quite some time. Not only due to the fact that I come from theology and I did my master's in systematic and historical theology, basically analyzing the history of the church in terms of its proliferation of religion and also the idea of sexuality and restricting the body. And simultaneously, in my own recent research, I've delved into the study of pervasive whiteness in post-apartheid South Africa. Now, we know that South Africa has had a difficult history with Christianity in terms of how, especially its institutions, have sort of imposed a racial segregation as a result of an idea of chosenness. We also know that, for example, certain fringe religious movements, as you can, for example, see in the recent series, I think it was posted last year on Showmax, called The Illuminated, where certain religious cults are, for example, identified in this whole thing. And so I think we need to distinguish, first of all, between, as you said, mainstream religion and religious cults, because lately there is, in recent scholarship, there's the sort of umbrella definition of Pentecostal, charismatic, and evangelical traditions, which is somewhat the umbrella term for these traditions. And as such, there are mainstream ideologies and there are cults. And I distinguish between the two because of the fact that in the one sense, you've got the mainstream churches, and then on the other hand, you've got cults. And we've seen recently how this one of these churches have been implicated in a corruption scandal and has been a front for money laundering. We've also seen with Heinz Winkler's wife, Arlette Winkler, who created her own diet cult, which is a sort of a personality cult in and of itself. And these self-sealing, emotional, exploitative cults are surrounding around personalities and sort of financial wellness as sort of an ideal, and simultaneously exploiting individuals by being, overly charismatic and in their authority. Max Weber referred to it as effective bonds and the idea of being coercive in their approach to brainwashing individuals. We see this in mega churches in South Africa as well. Prominent mega churches who exploit their individuals, such as, especially, and I use this in my research, a bunch of case studies of mega churches and mega costalism in South Africa, which is a big concern.
You write about a term called conspirituality in terms of a collective conspiratorial thinking. What is conspirituality?
So conspirituality is something that is entirely different in terms of the fact that how it uses the idea of basically disinformation towards mind control and sort of using spirituality and conspiracy theories together, sort of creating a form of coercive authority. For example, you can use the idea of the COVID-19 vaccine, where, for example, they've judged Mogoeng, for example, who used the idea of the COVID-19 vaccine being the devil and the 666 being injected into your bloodstream. And that's a sort of a combination, if I can think of it immediately, the idea of conspirituality. But in a broader sense, it is sort of a referential thing of how there is the relationship between the other, the outsider, and the insider. And this balancing relationship sort of ostracizes the other and sort of creates a conspiratorial mindset within that self-insulating spiritual framework, where individuals are exploited and therefore mind-controlled via an idea of there is an external threatening cabal that sort of threatens your existence. And this is something we see with, for example, the Boeremark.
So when the CRL Rights Commission says let's investigate some form of self-regulation, what's the difference in exploitation?
So that's one of my biggest.
Yeah, what's the difference in exploitation when it comes to a mainstream church who says, well, a tithe is 10% of your salary, and through your belief, you may be a member in good standing. What's the level of exploitation between that and a church who says we want 50% of your salary, we're going to pray for you, and don't worry, you're going to get 3 times as much back? What is the difference? Where do you draw the line?
So I believe it's quite simple due to the fact that how you can identify malpractice in medical communities. For example, I believe that the religious sense, we've got the HPCSA for medical health professionals, and simultaneously we've got other regulatory bodies for even teachers. And both of these institutions deal with humans, and they are regulated by South African Qualifications Authority frameworks. The only thing and industry, I believe, that is not regulated currently, that does not delineate between doctrine and exploitation, is ineffectively the church. And my biggest issue with regards to this is especially due to the fact that how we've allowed these cults, and this is where I differentiate between religion and cults, is where this self-insulating systems actually produce a form of vulnerability within their congregants, like we see in the CRL Rights Commission's investigation in 2016 and 17, where they've investigated a lot of these churches exploiting belief systems and, feeding their congregants Dettol and petrol and all of these things. Yet this is one aspect of it, but we've not focused on the economic aspect of it. Nobody ever speaks about Bosasa and Gavin Watson basically paying off a bunch of charismatic churches in his business. Nobody talks about the late Ray McCauley, who has, for example, been involved in the ANC's elections during the Zuma and using Albert Lutuli's caucuses as their personal HQ, for example. Whereas they've been the main, I believe, institution where this ad hoc committee of the Section 22 has been introduced. And therefore, my main criticism of the Section 22 committee is the fact that essentially they're once again employing essentially bank robbers to regulate the banking system's security systems.
Dr. Tristán Kapp, I have to leave there, but really fascinating conversation. Hopefully we can continue with this with a broader conversation at a later time. Department of Research Studies at the University, Religious Studies at the University of Pretoria. Thanks so much for your time.